Welcome. We're very glad you decided to spend an hour of your evening with us tonight. I'm Alyssa DeFilippo, the Connections California Program Manager for Parents Helping Parents. Connections California is our online statewide resource and information hub for transition to adulthood and adult services. If you've been here before, welcome back. If you're a first-time viewer, we're very glad you're here. So if you want to be at administering a special needs trust after parents are gone, you are at the right place. This evening's presenters are Leanne Hitchman with offices in Torrance and Newport Beach. I think it's Leanne Hitchman Fiduciaries, I believe is the name of the company. So Leanne is a founding and senior partner, began her fiduciary practice in 2005, performing pro bono work throughout the Unbefriend Elderly program in Orange County. And her personal philosophy is to focus on a person's specific issues they may be facing during a very difficult season in life, as well as addressing their specific estate issues. So this compassionate, welcoming, and more holistic approach has led to a very successful fiduciary practice over the years. Also with us this evening is no stranger to the Connections California screen is Stephen Dale of the Golden State Pooled Trust. He has spent much of his time teaching courses to the public, financial professionals, and other attorneys on special needs trusts and trust administration, with a special emphasis on achieving independence. He is an attorney and disability rights advocate and trustee of the Golden State Pooled Trust. Also with us tonight is my esteemed colleague from TASK, T-A-S-K, TASK Parent Training Center in Southern California, the Los Angeles area, San Diego, and Imperial counties, among others. And she will be helping with Q&A and with the chat. And also, thanks to Gabriel, who is our expert interpreter this evening. If we could all remember to speak slowly so he can interpret for us, we'd very much appreciate it. Thank you, Gabriel, for being here. And now I will turn it over to Stephen, I think, who will be
Okay, let's see if I can make this work. Okay, so do we have the correct screen up?
We do.
Okay, and once again, I always enjoy, we were just talking, I know I've been doing presentations for PHP for at least 25 years, maybe longer, when these young ladies were just in their infancy here. And it's just such a wonderful program that you have, especially with the education. And, you know, I always feel like having a child with a disability is kind of like going to a university where you actually never graduate. You just go from one stage to the next And so that's certainly, we're going to talk about that here. And I'm also excited to be presenting with I will say my favorite fiduciary, although my job is no matter who the fiduciary I'm with, but this actually is my favorite, Leanne Hitchman, and they do a really outstanding job down there in SoCal. Let me just kind of set this up, and then we'll get into the meat of this here, especially if I can get the PowerPoints working. Okay, so, there I am, there she is. Okay, so we're going to cover choice of trustee and all the different options. We're going to talk a little bit about advisory committees and trust protectors, then get a little more into the meat of this about record keeping and how do you actually make distributions from a trust. And then special issues we come up with all the time having to do with things like residences and care management. So the way I always like to set this up, and for a lot of you, this is not going to be hard at all, but just imagine you have a 17-year-old daughter whose name is Kathy. Now let's just say for the sake of argument today that Kathy has autism. Now, as we all know, just because somebody has a diagnosis or a label of autism, all that tells us is that they have autism. In fact, the old saying goes, if you've met one person with autism, you have met one person with autism. They are all individuals, and that's the challenge in many cases. But let's just say in this case that Kathy's disability is one where we're pretty certain that she's going to need significant assistance for the rest of her life. And let's say in this case that you come to the attorney or you come to the team, and we're going to talk about team planning tonight here. And so the kind of planning you're going to do for Kathy is going to be a little bit different. It's going to be quite a bit different than it would be, for lack of a better term, for a typical child. Now, part of this is that let's imagine that with that 17-year-old, you get that all set up, and let's say, God forbid, something happens to the grantors, the parents, and let's say the parents pass away in a tragic accident, and the trust goes into administration immediately. Now, actuarially, she's supposed to live until she's 87 years old. So if we just think of the enormity of the job, here, this trust could be under administration for 70 years, probably longer than you and I are going to be around, Leanne, or at least I hope so, but there you go. So here's the thing that comes up is a lot of times when we're looking at trusts and laws and programs and things like that, we're looking at how the laws are right now, but we don't know what the programs are going to be like, SSI, and that sort of thing for the next, 70 years. Also, for those of us in California, that have loved ones with intellectual or developmental disabilities, everything is centered on the Lanterman Act. And I am on the board of the ARC of California, and it's all important that we're constantly supporting the Lanterman Act. But what would happen if the regional center were no longer around, or the services weren't there, or let's say that the quality of services were so low that they really didn't meet our needs. So we really don't know the quality for the next 70 years. Now, quite frankly, a lot of that is your hands and your advocacy. We also don't know what the best choice of trustee is for the next 70 years. And I'll give you an example. I used to use A.G. Edwards as one of my corporate trustees years and years ago, because A.G. Edwards would always be around because they were around for 160 years. Well, that didn't work out really well. And I can give you some names of other groups and that kind of thing. So, part of this is just to get this set up is this is a long-term game here. And as we're going to talk about, the choice of management system and the choice of trustees and support systems is the single greatest issue about whether or not this trust is going to work or not. For those of you that know me, yeah, I am the trustee of the Golden State Pool Trust, but I am also an attorney who does an enormous amount of special needs trusts. And I will tell you that a well put together document is not going to provide the quality of life here that you're looking for. All it is a document that sets out a system of supports and that kind of thing. In the end, it is the trustee end of game. So, a couple of basics before we get into this. One thing about a special needs trust is what a special needs trust is. It's a contract here to provide quality of life for a person with a disability. And the way it preserves public benefits here, because of the resource rules for SSI and Medi-Cal, is the trustee has sole and absolute discretion over all distributions, and the beneficiary has virtually none. Now, once again, you could understand why, if you had the wrong trustee or the wrong trustee system, that could be a real problem. In essence, this is a form of what's called this spendthrift trust. But by directing those assets intended for the individual with special needs, you're preventing those assets from being counted as an available resource for SSI. So just setting this up, you can see the enormity of the importance of the trustee. Now, when you're choosing a trustee, we're going to go through all different options. And one thing about the disability world and about community living is it's always about choices. It's always about options here. So once again, we're going to talk a little bit about family members. We're going to talk about this thing called the private professional fiduciary, corporate trustees, banks, pooled trusts. And then if we have enough time for questions, we will talk about whatever you want to talk about. So here, so as far as family and friends go, and I will tell you as an attorney, this is usually the first choice that families have. And keep this in mind, when you hire a law firm, you're not just buying a document, you're hiring the experience of the law firm. And any experienced special needs trust attorney I know here understands that there's an enormous amount of responsibility and learning necessary and attention necessary here to provide for the quality of life for a person with a disability. And it can be a lot for family. So there's always an inclination to appoint family members as trustees and successors here. And it's not that that's incorrect, but part of what I'm hoping you get out of this is to think about other options. Many trusts fail because of ill-equipped trustees to handle the complexities of benefit eligibility and acquisitions of services. As family members, you've probably been doing this since you discovered your child had a disability, and there's a lot involved in advocating to get those assets. Oftentimes other family members, even though they may be smart, even though they may be dedicated, they're not really set up to do this in a lot of cases. While appointing a family member may be convenient, I've actually found that private professional trustees, including private professional fiduciaries, corporate trustees, or pool trusts, often outperform family members in the same role. And sometimes that's counterintuitive, but a lot of it just has to do with the experience and also trying to set up something that makes sense. Now, that doesn't mean that we exclude family members or what we would call natural supports. There's absolutely a role for them. And so one of the things we're going to talk about here in this presentation is we're going to talk about trust protectors or what are called advisory committee members and that kind of thing. So, Leanne, after I ran through all those slides, can you tell me a little bit about what is a private professional fiduciary?
Happy to. So we do lots of different things. We provide services to people with disabilities, to seniors, to children. So it's quite a gamut. Personally, I spend a lot of my time with special needs trusts and what we call discretionary trusts. And so some of the things that we do, a lot of it is financial, no question about it. But we manage things for clients, including their housing and medical needs, or at least from the standpoint of maybe paying for them. We can't necessarily force somebody to use certain medical doctors, et cetera. We offer some supervision regarding daily care, some financial management for paying the bills. In California, having a license is a big deal. We have to do some classwork, we have to pass an exam, we have to do continuing education. So it's something that, I cherish really. Like, I live and die by my license, because if I don't have my license, I can't practice. So it's definitely a big deal. There's also something called the Professional Fiduciaries Association of California, and that's a good place to go if you want to learn more about California fiduciaries. You can do a search to find names of fiduciaries. You can find out what it is we do. You can see some examples of the kind of training that we have to take. And in fact, you yourself as a parent could take some of those classes. So I think it's really it's a good place to go to learn things.
I think it's a great profession. And also, I would just throw this out for folks out there, if you're a sibling or if you have a family member who's really interested in the quality of life for a person with a disability, a private professional fiduciary it's a wonderful profession. So
yeah, I'm really lucky to have my
job.
There's
a private professional fiduciary.
I know. I'm embarrassed you put the slide up, but there's my firm. That's my daughter's dog. Yes, we bring our dogs to work. Some of the things that we do, the helping families navigate the ever-changing seasons of life. What we mean by that is the reality is we tend to come into play when somebody passes. And it's not easy. And when you've got a person with disabilities who's vulnerable, it's a particularly delicate situation. So that's us, complete with some of the dogs. We do have one of the things that's really important is a succession plan. Steve captured that photo, and you can see a picture of my daughter who's part of my succession plan there. So when we're talking about people that are going to need help for the next 70 years, it's really important that my firm have a very strong succession plan.
I will tell you, the private professional fiduciary has become the cornerstone, for trust administration here. And so we're going to be talking a lot about that. Now, another player when we're looking at options are what's called a pooled trust. And I just happen to be the trustee of the Golden State Pool Trust. So we're going to see there's more than just the Golden State Pooled Trust, but it's an option. A pooled trust is a kind of trust designed to benefit persons with disabilities, and in some ways, theoretically, it operates very similar to any other special needs trust. A pooled trust has to be managed by a nonprofit association here, and part of it, I always look at it as kind of a cross between a 401k and a special needs trust. You don't typically get your own. You don't necessarily get your own document when you join the pool, and we're going to see an example of that in a moment. But what you get is an account. They manage the funds and once again make the distributions. Although I will say one of the differences with most pooled trusts is that we are more gatekeepers. It's very rare that we actually see our beneficiaries firsthand. Leanne, on occasion, you actually go out and see your beneficiaries.
I do.
So that would be one of the distinctions here, that when you're looking at these choices, sometimes a gatekeeper is what you need. Very, very often, having somebody who actually gets involved on a personal level and sees the person. And that's one of those things you want to look at. When you join the pooled trust, what you do, and this is common with all the pooled trusts, you sign what's called a joinder agreement. Think of it like a contract. Here, so the master agreement has all the rules and all of that stuff, but then the joinder agreement has more information about the beneficiary themselves and what we want to accomplish and that kind of thing. So once again, instead of having a separate agreement, they sign that. What happens is, in most cases, what we're talking about is the parent or whoever's making the contribution is going to sign a joinder agreement or a contract. Now, the other thing that Golden State Pooled Trust does, and most, not all the other pooled trusts do, is they also work on standalone trusts. So the beneficiary, once again, in that case, can have their own separate trust drafted by an attorney here. And once again, you can appoint the pooled trust to manage that standalone trust. Now, remember, we are gatekeepers. We are not going to go out and personally see the beneficiary unless we send out a care manager. And we're going to talk about who those characters are in a moment as well. With that, what happens with the individual trust, if you do that, is that that trust has to name the Golden State Pooled Trust or whoever it is that you want as the trustee to allow them to administer their trust here in accordance with what we call an operating agreement. It basically tells us how the trust is going to operate and what everybody's role is. Now, here's some language, and we're going to see something similar later because, and there's a couple of things to look at. If you were looking at appointing the Golden State Pooled Trust, or even if you were looking at appointing Hitchman fiduciaries or Fremont Bank, whoever your trustee is, I am a big believer of having options to be able to change trustees if something happens here. And it could happen for any number of reasons out there. So the language here says that the trustee would be in a Golden State Pooled Trust or a private professional fiduciary, pooled trust, or a corporate trustee of an advisory committee or trust protector's choosing. That gives us the options. If for some reason something changes and we need to change management, and there's any number of reasons why that might happen here, that's easy enough to do. Just finishing up on the pooled trust, we are not the only pooled trust around. So here is a list of a number of other pooled trusts. Once again, I know each one of these trusts, each of them have little differences. For instance, the JLA Trust in Los Angeles here has their own care management, proxy parent, focuses a lot on people with behavioral health issues. Once again, it's good to know these different options. Leanne, what about corporate trustees?
There are basically banks. A corporate trustee is a bank that has a trust department. And they will, if you're talking to them, they will feel very trust or bank-like to you. And what I mean by that is you'll have a trust officer and they are very focused on managing the financials. They will typically want to have a care manager involved or somebody else to do that hands-on touch. I think the biggest thing about the corporate trustees is they all have minimums, and about the smallest minimum I know of is $1 million, but many of them are over that. So if the estate has enough money or the special needs trust has enough money to justify them, they they can be a choice. Their minimums often change. So if you're drafting an estate plan today and you think, oh, I'm just squeaking in there, just realize it might change in the future. So they can be very good for the financial management side of things, but they're not going to be as hands-on or as necessarily as in tune into special needs. And also, not every trust company, not every bank will take on a special needs trust. So you kind of have to double check on the size of trust, but also, do you do this kind of work?
Well, the other thing is, let me just back up a minute, back to this thing.
Mhm.
Just for myself, in the San Francisco Bay Area, there was a corporate trustee, a bank that heavily marketed in this area. And I remember when they first started, their minimums were 100,000. Then they moved them up to
Oh,
250,000.
wow. Okay.
Well, this is a few years ago
Yeah.
there, but now that same corporate trustee has raised their minimums to $2 million. And the reason I'm going back to this slide is just look at this. And one thing I do want to address later is, interviewing possible trustees and, kind of do's and don'ts. But look, I mean, in this situation, had you named, let's call it, big bank and trust, and it turned out that when you did it, their minimums were 250,000 and you were leaving $500,000, and now it's 2 million and it's not in your game. You need to have something
Yeah.
that's going to be able to deal with that possibility that the group that you change no longer will serve your group, or really more importantly, I've seen the quality of services for all sorts of trustees change over time. And in the end, it's all about benefit. It's all about quality of services. Let me see if I can get back to this. So here's a model I want to introduce as we kind of go through some of the details about the ins and outs of administration of trust. So then when we get to questions, you have a better idea of what we're talking about. This is a model that I quite frankly prefer. Okay. So, and once again, as an attorney, and quite frankly, I'm also the author of a software program used by 10,000 law offices here. This is in all their software programs. So in a lot of cases, the model we like is a professional trustee. It could be Hitchman fiduciaries. It could be Fremont Bank. It could be JLA Trust. It could be any number of organizations, but a professional trustee. With that, the trustee is going to manage the funds, make the distributions, do the taxes, and oversee basically how the trust is administered, including actually working directly with the beneficiary and deciding what we're going to pay for and what we're not. And that kind of thing, kind of the overseer. With that, oftentimes they're directed by an advisory committee. And if it's a group of people, we call it an advisory committee. If it's a single person, we call it a trust protector. There's some slight differences, but basically, this is a group that works and assists the trustee in determining what the needs are. And if the need arises, can actually amend the trust as law changes, because laws are going to change. And also, if need be, can replace the trustee here for any number of reasons. And for instance, I've got a fiduciary that I've worked with for 20 years that had the nerve to retire. And so, I mean, there's an example where all those trusts are moving, and a lot of that is being done through an advisory committee or a trust protector rather than having to go to court. Now, they can be directed by what's called the care manager, and these are kind of like private social workers. We're going to talk about that. in a bit, but these folks could be really helpful in identifying needs and services, oftentimes services that may not be aware to us. Going back to this, two pieces of suggested language that I like. We've seen this before. When we're naming a trustee, my preference is to name a stakeholder here who is likely to be the trustee. But this will be, and once again, I'll ask you, Leanne, to comment on this. Let's say you really do have a 17-year-old and you name Hitchman Fiduciaries as your trustee, and let's say you're healthy and in your late 40s, what are the chances you're actually going to be administering that trust in the next 20 years?
It won't be me, but I hope it's my firm. So I'm really lucky, but I am probably, I won't say I'm the exception, but not everybody has as strong of a succession plan as what I have. So if anybody out there knows me, I work with 2 of my 6 children. They're in their early 30s, so they're going to be around at least, I don't know, 30 or 40 years, right? Probably 40 years. But we also have, we have an emphasis on having a really young team. And that is because we want to have the succession plan continue, because the reality is that this goes for somebody's lifetime and we need people there. We need to be responsible. So that's what we're doing. I think, but I won't be there, Steve. You're right.
Well, right. But what you said up, Will, but it's continuity is what we're talking about here. So
exactly.
Most of the trustees, and trustees will tend to work with different attorneys. That's kind of how it works. A lot of it has to do with relationships here, and most of the trustees we work with out of courtesy will, allow themselves to be interviewed. But the point of the whole thing is that, this is something you want to keep an eye on. Ideally, it's best to have a group with a succession plan here, but the fact is that things change. Now, oftentimes, and I can't tell you how many times I've had this discussion as an attorney where let's say you name the daughter, and it's almost always the eldest daughter that gets named as the trustee. I don't know what that's all about, but almost
true.
always the eldest
Yeah.
trustee.
Yep.
And let's say when this was all set up, she was all set to be the trustee, and the plan was she's always going to live next door to her disabled sister and all of that. And lo and behold, she marries somebody in New York City and she's out of here, right? So really, it's, even if you're going to work with family, or you're even if you're working with family, it's nice to have an opt-out in here that if for some reason, let's say the family member who you trust is not going to be able to fulfill all those duties, that they can assign it to the professional trustee and then drop back as what we call a trust protector, kind of an overseer, somebody who would look at all the records, make sure that everything is being done prudently and all that. And so you can still keep your commitment even in New York City. So advisory committees. And I think kind of giving this to Leanne, because I know a lot of us who do trust work, we can have kind of a love-hate relationship with advisory committees. Huh?
I hear so many people say that, but from my perspective, I really welcome having an advisory committee. And so I'd like everyone to realize maybe what happens when there aren't people involved, because we have a number of trusts like that where there just isn't anybody. And so as trustee, I am kind of out there trying to figure out what's the best thing to do for somebody. Yeah, I might engage a care manager. Certainly, I would go out and figure things out myself. But having an advisory committee that knows that individual, oh my gosh, I welcome that. I absolutely welcome that. The negative of an advisory committee is that maybe they don't all agree, or maybe there's unrealistic expectations. And so, like, for example, I work with a trust protector, and he's the brother of he's the uncle of these relatively young but grown women. And as trust protector, he wants to know everything about them, like literally personal details, but he doesn't really know them himself personally. He thinks me as a trustee is going to get it for him. So that's an example where maybe a trust protector is a little bit prickly to deal with. But it's okay, because you know what's good about it is it gives me accountability. It gives me somebody to give my accountings to, and it gives me somebody that I can make objections to some of the work that I'm doing, and that's okay. I have absolutely no problem with that. So in general, I think they're great.
Also, I'm just realizing, I hope we're not talking too fast for the.
I know, I went too,
interpreter.
sorry about that.
Okay, maybe
I'll
I
slow
will
down.
do my
Yes,
best to slow
yes.
it down a little bit, but and I want to apologize. If I could say it in Spanish, I would. But anyway, so
Lo
here's a
siento.
suggestion that are included in the trust that we put together, because I actually worked with the group and we kind of studied why a lot of advisory committees don't function properly. And when we kind of figured out that if we don't tell folks what they're supposed to do, who's in charge, and how they're going to do it, then they're just floundering, going, "Well, I'm on an advisory committee." In fact, it's not unusual as an attorney to open up a trust that's been administered for 10 or 15 years with an advisory committee with people that don't even know they're on the advisory committee and they've never met. So
Yeah.
so a couple of things, just as suggestions. We use a thing called the Wealth Council Trust here. So in this case, oftentimes what we do is we'll name natural supports, family members and things like that, as chairpersons. And their job would be, once again, to make sure the meetings run on time and that sort of thing, but also to select the other advisory committees and part committee members. And what we also include with it is a schedule of successor advisory committee members. Let's say what you have is Uncle Bob that you're assigning to the advisory committee, but Uncle Bob is finishing up his last 5 years in prison, and we're thinking, well, maybe he's not really the guy to use right now. We should have somebody else. Well, rather than run down to the attorney's office and amend it just to change the name, you can just keep a schedule and keep adding and subtracting names as time goes on. The point of the whole thing is to have some sort of checks and balance here. So, record keeping. Is record keeping important?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a big deal. And I think when I see family trustees, oh my gosh, my heart goes out to them, because they're doing this job. They probably feel a little overwhelmed, like they don't know all the details of public benefits, or they don't know exactly what the right decision is. And so you're putting a big burden on them in that sense. But then on top of it all, you're saying you must keep good records. And what does that mean, keeping good records? Well, bad news is, guys, the trustee's in the hot seat, and many, many different people can ask for those records at any time. So, for example, Social Security can come knocking on the beneficiary's door and demand something as simple as receipts for maybe some of the purchases that they've made. So, as a trustee, you've got to be thinking about who's going to be asking me for documentation, how am I going to evidence it, and how quickly can I evidence it? Because if Social Security is questioning the beneficiary and threatening to remove SSI, we don't have time to recreate records. So, obviously it's what I do for a living. So we have lots and lots of what I hope are best practices in place in terms of how we keep it. But just because somebody's a family trustee, they need to understand that they have equal responsibility, which is a bit of a harsh statement to make, but it comes with the territory of doing that job. So literally, if a trustee cannot account for how perhaps some money that's in question was spent, the beneficiary could lose their benefits. Social Security could say, you're done, can't prove it. You're cut off from that money that you're getting, which, might be something like close to $1,300 a month. I had that happen recently in a situation where it's kind of a long story, but the previous trustee sold helped the beneficiary sell a property, and it was jointly owned by a family member and the beneficiary. And when the house escrow closed, those proceeds went into the beneficiary's bank account. She immediately transferred it back to the family member because that was who really was owed to. But from Social Security's perspective, she could not document what happened and that she had paid it back. And so they completely cut out her SSI. I had to go back and try to recreate those records. But unfortunately, by the time I did it, Social Security was just, they were done with her, sadly. And we got to wait now 3 years before she can reapply again. So records are everything. And was it the family member's fault? No, of course not. They didn't mean to cause that, but they still had that same duty to the beneficiary to do it. So that's a sad story. I have better happy
Well, but the
stories, but
thing
record
about it
keeping is a
is,
big deal.
and I think this is one of the reasons that I think professional trustees are so important. Here's a lot of it is the record keeping. I know at the Golden State Pool Trust, we are always looking at this and we need to be ready at a moment's notice to have those records in
Exactly.
shape. And when they are in shape, then we can move along and do all the wonderful things. But I have seen people literally get sick. I actually had a beneficiary die from the anxiety of losing their public
Oh,
benefits. And you know, you could do a whole program on that, but it's these things you need to take them seriously. So if you have somebody experienced, it's not that anybody can guarantee there won't be a problem, but the chances of problem are much less here. And it's an awful lot for a busy family member to do and keep up with. It's easy to, put the special needs trust off to the side, but the repercussions can be so terrible and they can be expensive too. So
yeah.
Leanne, we got the stuff in the trust and all of that. Isn't that good? Well, how do we actually
What do we do?
Yeah, what do we do? I mean, how are you going to actually get some sort of benefit to the beneficiary?
Yeah. So this is where it all happens, Steve, in my opinion. This is where we earn our keep. We can talk about all these other things, but at the end of the day, on a day-to-day, how does this trust benefit the life of somebody? This is it. So we can do things like make a direct distribution, meaning I'm giving somebody $1,000 a month. Typically not a good idea though, because that's going to trigger loss of public benefit. So that is not something that we do routinely. And it's definitely something though that I'm routinely asked to do. And people get frustrated that I can't just do it. But my job is to make sure that they can keep their public benefits. So I'm going to be very cautious in evaluating a request. I used to do a presentation saying, a trustee isn't just a check writer, because I think sometimes that's what people think, is that we're just sitting here making payments. But guys, that's not what we're paid to do. We're supposed to understand the public benefits, the rules, and we're supposed to make intelligent decisions. So just because somebody wants the $30,000 for plastic surgery, yeah, it might enhance their self-esteem, but if the whole trust is $500,000 and we're talking about somebody who's going to live a long time, that might not be the best place to use the money. So direct distributions cash, not a great idea. TrueLink cards, gosh, we've been a partner of TrueLink forever, I think since they first had the idea in their heads. So TrueLink is a prepaid Visa card, and the reason why it's a good deal, and I'll slow down, I hope everyone's listening. You cannot simply give prepaid what do you call those, Steve? Like the gift cards. You cannot do gift cards, okay, guys? No gift cards. But what you can do is you can do something called a TrueLink card. And Social Security has actually made an exception for them. And the reason for it is because it's this very granular Visa card where you as trustee can turn off and on certain categories. So it's almost like you're approving each and every expenditure. And so in the eyes of Social Security, they feel like you're acting like a trustee. It's a great way of documenting. For those of you that are avoiding the paperwork, TrueLink does give you a pretty good level of documentation, but you should still couple it with receipts. So that's a really good way. You load money from the trust onto this prepaid Visa card. You set the parameters of what it can be spent on. And the thing is so cool is the beneficiary doesn't have to come in and ask you for every little tiny item. So we're preserving public benefit, but we're also preserving the dignity of that beneficiary. Because I don't need to know that he bought new underwear or a certain type of shirt or whatever it is. There needs to be a certain level of privacy there. Third one is credit cards. So it is perfectly acceptable in the eyes of Social Security to pay from the trust directly to the credit card bill. Guys, I've said that really carefully. The trust can pay the beneficiary's credit card if indeed the expenditure is documented and fits within the parameters of acceptability to Social Security. Now, that does not mean all credit card purchases are paid for by the trust. Let me say that again. That does not mean that the trustee is going to come in and say, I'm going to pay your credit card bill no matter what every month, because that's a whole different issue. And it's an important thing to distinguish. I think sometimes family trustees feel perhaps intimidated because they hear that the trust can pay the credit card. But again, you need to be checking each expenditure, and it should be within the budget that you've agreed upon. One of the unpopular decisions I make sometimes is to not pay off credit card debt, and that makes beneficiaries really sad. But I work with some individuals who have a lot of challenges with impulse control. And literally, if I paid off the credit card this month in October, by December, it would be maxed out again. And so I'd be blowing the budget if I did that every single time. So trustees, you can pay the credit card, but you need to document what you're paying for and why it's okay. And sometimes you might have to say no. So it's a great thing if you can make it work and the ability to control the spending is there, then by all means use it. If there's impulse control issues, consider TrueLink, because you get to load how much money's on there. And when the money's out, it's out. It's like a gift card. You're done. You're out of your gift. And last but not least are ABLE accounts. We love ABLE accounts. We use them all the time. So ABLE accounts are allowed for individuals who have an identified disability before the age of 26. And the reason, excuse me, the reason why they're so cool is that any money that you distribute from the trust into the ABLE account becomes the beneficiary's money. So there's no accountability, there's no receipts. I have been asked for receipts on occasion by the court, by Social Security, and guess what? I get to tell them no, go pound sand, because that's not okay. You don't have to show it. The whole deal with being able to distribute from trust into an ABLE account, it becomes that person's money and they can spend it how they see fit. So what we typically want to do is have a combination of all of these kinds of things. So there's not like there's one answer. Somebody came to me the other day and they said, should I have a special needs trust or should I have an ABLE account? And the answer is, of course, they're not mutually exclusive. You're going to use different things for different purposes. So ABLE accounts, assuming the beneficiary qualifies, is a great way to get money to them, to save money so that they can still have funds but be over the $2,000 limit. So just use a combination of the things.
By the way, a lot of these tools, because this is a long-term game, and I think I know one thing that you and your team focus on is teaching folks how to manage money.
Yes.
So it could be that over time, maybe we have an issue with overspending, and this money's got to last for a long time. But
Exactly.
with the right work, maybe they can learn how to manage money. I don't know. Anyway, that was really great.
I have hope. I have hope, Steve. I think
And
we
my
can be
wife has hope for
effective.
me. Although I desperately want a Catalina 400 MK2 sailboat with a bow
No,
thruster.
no.
But my wife says I can't have it, so I guess that's it. She's my fiduciary. Oh, here is a challenge. Okay,
It's my favorite
now,
topic. Yeah.
as we all know, that housing, I know for me, is probably the greatest issue that I deal with my families here.
Mm,
But there's some special issues when we're talking about houses. So, and in the right situation, it can provide a secure place for the person to live. A lot of folks with disabilities don't handle changes real well. Unfortunately, in all too many cases, I bet you I evict at least one, oftentimes two people a year out of the home they probably grew up in because they probably had a plan set up that was just really unrealistic. Here,
yeah.
the advantage is that it provides the home um, here with, a solid place to live, although you have to be careful too, because sometimes it'll help you be active in the community. I've seen it as a very small prison where, somebody gets themselves
Mhm.
isolated. But, the challenge is often, I think the biggest one is, and sometimes you wonder, what were they thinking? They leave the house for the use of the child with the disability, but there's no funds for taxes and maintenance. Guess what's going to happen here? Or there's some sort of
Mhm.
property management issues. We go back to this. If you have a house that could be used by your child for 40, 50 years, you're probably talking about two roofs, you're talking about all sorts of things over that period of time. And then a lot of it also has to do with attendant care issues. And if we were really getting into this, there's some really cool programs beyond IHSS. There's the SLS and the ILS and all of that. And sometimes with the right team put together, you can do some marvelous things, but it takes a lot of thought. I don't know, as a fiduciary, Leanne, what do you see about houses? Are they
My
sometimes
gosh.
situation?
I want them to have the house, but it is frequently an issue. So my standard example is John and Mary. Mary's mom, she's 85 years old. John is 60. Maybe he's on the spectrum. They have this wonderful, consistent life carved out for them. They live on their combined Social Security and IHSS hours, and they live modestly, and it works. Problem is the house has a ton of deferred maintenance on it because they don't have the funds to fix it. And then, Mary wants John to continue living there, but it's a 4-bedroom, 2-bath house on a quarter of an acre lot. And John does not have the ability to properly manage it. So it is really a disaster, just man, coming down fast on it for John once Mary passes. I had a situation where someone on the spectrum living in the house that was kind of too big for him too, and it was just one person, which has its own challenges. But he had a leak in the house, and he didn't want to tell me that it happened. He thought it was his fault. And of course, it wasn't his fault. But I didn't catch it until I went out as an inspection. Well, that only happened once a year. And I found the mold. I mean, the way he was living was just horrific. And he just wasn't, he couldn't find the words to tell me what had happened. And no matter how much I reassured him that this wasn't his fault, he believed it was. So this is really it was a, dare I say, it was just a terrible setup for him because I couldn't force him out of the house. I couldn't say, no, you're not going to be successful. But with a little bit of planning ahead of time and setting expectations better, we could have saved him so much grief and avoided him living in such deplorable conditions. So I love the fact that you included property management on there too, Steve. So it's not, we tend to talk a lot about the costs. And typically we like to see maybe a 2-to-1 ratio at minimum of the values of the house to the liquid assets, which is really hard to get to. But even past the money part, you've also got the property management issues and also potentially isolation, although I never want to judge on that because one person's isolation is another person's pleasure. But definitely you need to think this one through. You guys know your children, but try to take the emotionality out of it. It just doesn't always work very well.
I think we could do a whole program on housing and do's and don'ts. When it works, it's a wonderful
Yeah,
thing. So for
it's
families that are
wonderful.
planning, I wouldn't count it out, but you need to be super vigilant about this and think
Yeah.
it through and all the different possibilities.
And Steve, I thought it was working. I thought because he did like his privacy, he didn't want me to come over much. I insisted on an annual inspection. I thought he was okay. And I'm pretty good about knowing our beneficiaries. It wasn't okay. It just wasn't good.
So I think our last issue, and then we'll answer questions. So we can run a little bit over. I can't go too far because Mrs. Dale says don't be too late for dinner here. So anyway, care management. And you pulled this one.
All right. So a care manager is a social worker or a medical person who is geared toward looking at the needs of the beneficiary. So some trustees hire somebody. Sometimes we do both. We have care management skills in-house. I myself am a certified care manager. I have a nurse on staff, but we also frequently utilize outside care managers too. And what we do is we ask them to take a look at what are the needs of the individual. And that could be medical, that could be social, that could be, you know, basic financial living kinds of needs. It could be public benefits. And so some care managers are all medical. Some tend to look at medical issues like over medication or safety issues. The pool doesn't have a fence, or caregiving issues. They really shouldn't be on their own anymore. They need to have a caregiver. And then some of the care managers are really good at analyzing public benefits. You just have to know ahead of time what you've got and what their skills are before you engage them.
It's a real plus if you have either a private fiduciary or even a pooled trust with their own on-staff care management. Even with that, one of my favorite care management groups is a group called RCC, and one of this is I'll give them a little shout out. I sent them out to one of my beneficiaries last week, and because my beneficiary is acting a little bit odd, we found out she was over medicated. We found out that there were problems with the house, that there were just so many things going on. I couldn't be more thankful that we were able to get everything around in short order. Care managers can be a real blessing, and different care managers do different things. And one of the other things I like about RCC is they actually have former regional center staff that will actually go to IPPs and things like that, which, as we all know, under the Lanterman system, it's all about the IPP. So kind of last thoughts, and then we can stay a little bit late. The choice of trustee is the greatest factor about whether these things work or don't work. I'm just telling you, don't blow this off. This is really serious stuff. And even if you're going to name a family member, make sure that there's some way that if situations change, and they're going to, that we can make sure we have good management, good accountable management, who's going to work on enhancing that quality of life. The document has to be flexible to deal with issues the way they present themselves now and unanticipated things. Beware of making requirements that may be too difficult or impossible to carry out. I was telling Leanne, I think the other day, I had a trust that I was the attorney for, and it said in that trust, which was put together in, I think in 1910, that it can only be invested in railroad stock. So that stock went way up, and then it went way down, and they rode that thing all the way down. Having a requirement that the house can never be sold is going to cause no end of problems, beware. So once again, and also you just need to keep in mind that the administration of these trusts is a long-term commitment. It can last for a very long time. And so, part of the real challenge is to make sure that we have that management system in place here that inevitably is going to adjust from time to time to keep that continuity of care. The document itself cannot do that. All the document is doing is setting up how things are to be done, but somebody's actually got to do it. Last thing is, in many cases here, administration of a trust is a team sport. And I know with Leanne and I, we're constantly involved with all sorts of other professionals and that sort of thing, just really busy trying to do whatever's necessary to be able to provide those essential things to our beneficiaries, things that many of us take for granted. Let's go to the most terrifying part of the program. Do we have any questions?
Yeah, and there's some really good ones here.
Uh-oh.
Yes, there's quite a few. So I'm going to start. First one says, can you summarize the pros and cons of using a pooled trust?
The pro would be that we typically don't have a minimum. Sometimes the fees are less. I mean, that really depends on facts and circumstances. And many times you're pulling the resources of hundreds, in some cases, thousands of beneficiaries. The negative is, and this would be twofold. One is normally the pooled trust is a call center, right? So we do not meet the beneficiaries. Doesn't mean we're not involved. And there's lots of folks that can be served over the phone and that sort of thing. But we have to work through an intermediary. Oftentimes we call them what are called beneficiary advocates, who have to, if the person with the disability can't do it themselves. If that doesn't work, we've got to hire somebody. And I know when I'm an attorney, when I'm trying to counsel my clients about whether they should use a pool trust or a private fiduciary or a bank, a lot of it has to do with the need for hands-on. I think that's one of the biggest issues. Last thing to consider, and this is one of the reasons why with the pool trust, I like the individual trust managed by the pool trust. But if you put the funds in the pool, it's very difficult to move it from one pool trust to another. In fact, some pool trusts do not allow that portability. For me, tying up all the funds with one option or another without the option to be able to change just doesn't work for me. For me, it's all about options. That's my short answer.
Great. So the next one says, how would a professional trustee know the individual needs of the person on a daily, monthly, or weekly basis?
That's a darn good question.
You want me to take it?
Yeah, sure.
That is the hardest question, and that's probably the biggest expectation setting I have to do for a family, because as a trustee, I don't know the daily needs. And so it is really important that the beneficiary have an advocate, if at all possible, that knows those. If it's, daily needs, somebody probably needs to be they need some sort of living arrangements like supported living services or perhaps an assisted living. There has to be somebody there because I can't provide that as a trustee. Maybe on a monthly basis, it might be a care manager. It might be the trustee kind of, but as soon as it starts getting into really, really detailed daily kinds of things, I think deciding who's living with the individual becomes super important. No trustee is going to be able to do that. No care manager is going to be able to do that. It would be cost prohibitive. So that's probably the biggest expectation setting issue that I have. But a good trustee is looking for it, though.
It would occur to me that if somebody needs that level of oversight, there's probably going to be an attendant. But then the question is,
right,
who watches the attendant?
Exactly. So certainly we like to make a surprise visit or two, or have a care manager make a visit. We have uncovered elder abuse, quite frankly. But again, it's not going to be on that daily kind of basis. But I've got some pretty good stories about some elder abuse, or financial elder abuse, maybe taking advantage of people. And I love the way you said it, Steve, that with the care management, you just felt something wasn't right. That's usually our intuition is on, and then we go out and investigate.
The visit I had from the care manager to my beneficiary den in San Diego the other day, the caregiver put in their resignation before the care manager got back to the office. I wonder what was going on there.
I wonder.
Yes, okay. And you know, there are these complexities because basically, you know,
Mhm.
we're basically replacing that parent advocate, which is an almost impossible thing to do.
I
But
can't do
vigilance
it.
is so important on these things, and it just
Yeah.
really depends on the
Mhm.
situation.
Vigilance, trust your intuition. We uncovered one when we heard the beneficiary. My care manager was talking to the beneficiary, and we could hear somebody in the background saying, "And make sure you get this, and make sure you get that." And that triggered us to go do a surprise visit, and we found an unlicensed group home.
The
Moving
next question for you guys. If the individual with special needs survives beyond any other family members, can a fiduciary help them sell the family home?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah.
gotta
If
do
it's part
something
of the
with the home.
trust, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
You have
Yeah,
to
we
do
do it all
something
the
with the
time.
house, right?
Yeah, we do it all the time.
Yeah. And some fiduciaries will work with real estate, some will not touch it under any circumstance, don't even
That's
ask.
true.
Really depends on the fiduciary.
That's true.
Off another one.
Let's see. Can a family member trustee make the decision to opt out as trustee and hire a professional firm?
You can, but here would be my suggestion. It depends on the language in the trust. You can often go outside the language in the trust, but if you do that, you're gonna go to court. If you're gonna go to court, you're talking about attorneys and fees and things like that, which might be better spent on the person with the disability. So a well
Yeah.
put together plan is gonna have an option. By the way, I, this is my feeling. I always feel like trying to match up the trustee with the beneficiary is kind of like setting up a blind date. And I'm pretty good at it. And usually the magic works, but sometimes it just does not work. And so there may be situations where we need to change those trustees and change them quickly. I've had a situation with a guy named Fred Isaacs. How could you not love old Fred? Here he passed away years ago. For some reason, it just wasn't clicking. We changed it to another trustee who did exactly the same thing, and everything was fine. You know, sometimes it is a personal relationship. You know?
Do advisory committee members get paid by the trust for their time?
That is such a good question. Oh boy, it's a loaded question. I have a situation where a trust protector wanted significant money. Oh gosh, they're yes, they can get paid for their time. Steve, I'll let you comment it from a legal perspective, but I have had one instance where somebody went rogue and it was not pretty, and there was not a lot of case law supporting what is will go and not go, and I had to take it to court and have a judge rule on it.
Yeah. In the vast majority of the cases, even when it's allowed, I found that most folks don't
Right.
here and with that. But
Yep.
I mean, and I tell people to treat it like a job, but even when they're offered something, they usually don't do it.
Yeah.
So that's an unusual situation, but it does happen, and you got to work through it, and that could be difficult.
Yep. It wasn't fun. It was not pretty.
By the way, if somebody
Very
has a
rare,
bad
but
Yelp
things can
review,
happen.
that doesn't mean they're a bad fiduciary. Oftentimes, your job is to say the things that are difficult, like, no, I'm not buying, this is one last week. No, I'm not buying you a Tesla, maybe after you get a driver's license and all that, but no, I'm not buying you a Tesla because you think they're pretty, because,
Yeah.
and sometimes your job is to be that gatekeeper. Anymore.
Mm.
Next
No,
one, if we still have time. Yeah, looks like we still have a few minutes, right? Do professional fiduciaries have a minimum like banks to manage a trust?
Many do. I don't. But I have a minimum annual charge, but I don't I know many fiduciaries out there will say I need $1 million or whatever. We don't do that. We feel very strongly that on these inherited special needs trusts, the parents don't know how much they're going to have. And they still need to plan. So we will do everything in our power to bring it under our supervision. We just don't like to turn people away unless the administrative fees just don't make sense vis-a-vis the size of the trust. I mean, I don't want the money to be sent on me when it could go to the individual.
Sometimes it's just trying to get the best bang for the buck that you can.
Exactly, Steve. But
Yeah.
I don't like that attitude of I only take, I have a minimum. It's like, that's not what this business should be about.
I think it's important to say that these private fiduciaries, they're individuals. They run their practices different. Some focus on a specific population, like IMT Associates focuses on behavioral health and does a wonderful job here. So there's no set
Mhm.
rules. I will tell you that if you're a leader of a disability group or whatever, I would really suggest that you find your local PFAC chapter and see if you can find a fiduciary that'll come out and talk to your group, because once again, it's a wonderful profession. I think the service private fiduciaries provide is great. I think it would be really nice if the community was more familiar with them. In the end, they're just individuals. Mhm.
I'm just going to pop in and say we're getting very, very close. So please just go ahead and click on those links. And then also, there are a couple of questions, Louisa, if you don't mind, just to group them together. They're asking about fees, and I don't know if you want to comment on that right now, but you could go to websites or give a call. Also, people want to know, Leanne, if they could use Hitchman, statewide, or do they have to be in your location? And someone's asking specifically if you know anything about the Good Shepherd Fund.
I don't know about the Good Shepherd Fund. Steve probably does.
I know about that, but why don't you knock off
Yeah.
the rest of those?
Yeah. So, what's happening more and more, everybody, is because we have decided to specialize in this, our geography is expanding. So we have trusts everywhere. The one thing that I will say is, for a trust up in Steve's area, I can't just pop in there on a moment's notice. So there are times like this weekend or Friday, I'm going to Ventura, which is a pretty decent hike for me from where I live in Orange County. And what I really want is my camper van, so I can do this more often. But seriously, I will go and I'll visit multiple. I have multiple clients there, so I will visit them, but I can't be there at a heartbeat. But then what I do is I make sure I have arrangements with local care managers to be able to do that. I mean, we even have a trust in Alabama, which is a long story. It started in California and they moved and they didn't like the Alabama trustees. So here we are many years later. Yeah.
Steve, you were going to comment on.
Oh, Good Shepherd. Good Shepherd has been absorbed in the Secured Futures Group.
Yeah.
Once again, Secured Futures, which is a national pool trust. I actually have made a number of referrals to them. I think, once again, I think they're a fine trust. Haven't had much to do with them lately, but all that, but even pool trusts change from time to time, so of their focus and how they operate. Everything is evolving. This is a long-term game. Nothing bad has happened. Usually when something bad happens, I know, so I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
Good Shepherd. But the pool trusts, once again, they can be a good option. Once again, they typically don't have stated minimums. There are some like de facto minimums, like we have a minimum of $1,500 a year management. So it'd be silly for us to manage $10,000. That would be something more towards an able account, which, by the way, able accounts are going to go up to 19,000 next year. Woohoo! Here. So, but part of it is working out a plan. And I know one thing, Leanne and I are working with with a group to come up with the absolute best practices. And it's a lot of what we're going to come up with, we'll share. But I'll tell you, I'm a big believer in what are called distribution plans. basically setting up an annual
Mhm.
budget that gets reviewed year after year after year for any number of reasons. One of which is, of course, we want to do everything we can to enhance the quality of life for the beneficiary. But if I've got $500,000 and this person is likely to live 40 years, I've got to be fairly conservative because if I spend all the money in the beginning, I don't know what the future is here. And so I think one of the hardest jobs, Leanne, is I don't like to say no, but I often find myself saying no because once again, um, this has to last for a while. And oftentimes with
Right.
the distribution plan, it has something we can look at so that, once again, the argument is that if we go outside of that, we're going to run out of money. And then what are we going to do?
Exactly. That is my biggest fear, is running out of money. So for me, there's three things I look at first. Medical care, medical insurance. Is Medi-Cal there, or is there something else we need? Medicare. The second thing is does the person have food to eat? That's kind of my bare minimum. I'm not being sarcastic. And the last one is a roof over your head, because shelter costs are so, so expensive. So we got to meet those minimum three things before we can talk about the fun stuff. And that makes me unpopular, as Steve said. I'm very
And
unpopular some days.
Mhm.
maybe
Okay,
having somebody,
questions are real good, but perhaps you have their contact information, I think is still up on the screen. Maybe just give a call to have your question answered potentially. Would that be okay with the two of you? I don't want you inundated with calls to have questions answered,
Send an
but
email if you want.
yeah.
Email's great. Yeah, no. Email's great though,
for
because then I
me,
can
if
answer.
you
Otherwise, we
can,
play phone tag.
you see the person in the left-hand corner, it says Amy at GSPT. That is my education and resource director, who is probably on the call right now, who will probably be talking tomorrow about this presentation and that kind of thing. But Amy keeps our mailing list, but also helps make sure that when we're answering questions, we can do that.